have been writing professionally since 1993. I started out writing about music and then sort of went over into cinema and wrote about comic books and the Andrew and Esposito book. I did a biography of Jim Mooney. He's a Marvel and DC artist. He went back to the golden age. I also did a biography of Keith Chatto, an Australian artist, very legendary Australian artist. I wrote a really small, thin book on Philip Wayne. I really only wanted to write it because Philip Wayne was such a nut. Just his story was unbelievable. I used to tell people about Philip Wayne and the things he did. They'd go, "Oh, get off, no." And you've got to write it down. So I did. The two big ones of recent times would be the biography I wrote on Len Lawson, the Australian artist who was also a rapist and a murderer, and a very nasty fellow indeed. And then there was The World versus Todd McFarlane, which came about because I was writing blog entries following the Todd McFarlane and Neil Gaiman court case. A few people I knew went, there's a book here, you just got to keep going with it. And before I knew it, I sort of started digging. I thought, actually, there is. And wrote this book, The World versus Todd McFarlane, which was basically all the people that have sued Todd McFarlane and all the people he sued over the years. And because there's always that question of if everyone keeps suing Todd McFarlane, he must be a really bad businessman. Like, I used to have to point out to people that actually, no, he's a very successful businessman. He's worth more money than you could count. And he's done it by being very bullish and pig-headed. And that book, Rob Layfeld read and reviewed it on his podcast a couple of times and sort of exploded from there, because it was like, and I even said to Rob, because he started talking to me about it, and he kept telling me how he loved it because it was so, in his words, ridiculously well researched. I went, but Rob, there's an entire chapter in there about you and Todd McFarlane. And he went, yes, and everything in there is actually accurate for once. Okay, great. And of course that ended up leading to the rise of Image Comics, because people wanted to know more about Image. And I thought, to be honest, I didn't want to do it, which is strange when you look at how thick this thing is. But I didn't want to do it. But before I knew it, I was well into it. And part of it came about because people that read The World versus Todd McFarlane were insisted that that was only one part of the story. Like, why did he form Image Comics? And I kept telling people, well, he didn't form Image Comics. It's actually Rob Layfeld that did that. Why did he leave Marvel? So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have to explain that. So sort of went from there. There were other really good stories that came out about the other people of Image, Jim Lee, for example, and some of the other people that, Rob Layfeld's a larger-than-life, colourful character in his own right, and there was stuff in there that I thought, well, this should actually get out there. If nothing else, if just to put a lot of lies to bed and a lot of things that people believe is true that isn't. I've got tens, if not hundreds of thousands of documents and pages of quotes and interviews and stories and articles and information on release dates, and going back to when these guys first started drawing comic books. And that was part of the thing, was to get their words as they said them at the time, not what they're saying now, but what they said back then. So it was tracking down as many interviews as I could find with them. And there are so many, it's not funny, especially with Todd McFarlane, because he's very popular. He was a very outspoken person. And then it was finding contemporary comments and interviews and quotes from other people around, people that criticise them, people that praise them, people that work for them, people that said they'd never work for them. It's been a case of going after everything that I could possibly find, and even as something as simple as how the idea of Image was formulated and how it all sort of came together in 1990 through 91, how it was reported then. It's different to how it's reported now. So, I'll let people make up their own mind. Were they lying then when it was happening, or were they lying now, years down the track? Personally, I don't think they were lying at either point. I just think they remember it differently. Well, the book starts in 1938 with the creation of Superman. Now, the reason it starts there is when I wrote the book first, I started it in 1992 when Image formed. And the few people that looked at it went, I don't get why these guys who were making many millions of dollars, Jim Lee, Liefeld and McFarlane, would walk away from Marvel Comics and sink all their money into their own company. It doesn't make sense. So I had to explain how the comic book companies themselves have been ripping off creators right from the start, right from Superman. Right from the moment when Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster went to DC and said, look, here's a character called Superman, and they went, yep, we'll have that. Image Comics was going to happen. From the moment that they signed, they didn't sell Superman for $130. They signed a release form and got no money whatsoever. The $130 that they got was what they were owed for drawing 13 pages of artwork at $10 a page. So they were just being paid. That $130 was just what they were owed for the artwork, for the story. So the minute they signed that release form, and DC got Superman, and all of the lawsuits that have happened since, with Jerry Siegel and then his estate suing for that character and not winning, Image Comics had to happen. I've been told this by many a person that worked at Marvel and DC. Jim Mooney was working for them back in the 40s, and Mike Esposito in the late 40s, early 50s, Don Pearl and people like that. They all said the same thing, like, behave, because if we can do that to Siegel and Schuster, what do you think we could do to you? So all of these guys and girls all looked at what happened to Siegel and Schuster and went, I can't live like that in poverty with nothing. And certainly in Jerry Siegel's case, a very, very angry and bitter man for the rest of his life, because all of these millions, coming up to billions, being pumped out into his character, made sense to start right at the start and give that potted history to get to the Image part, which takes up the bulk of the book. That helps, I hope, explain to people why, Todd McFarlane can be one of the most successful guys of the early 90s, which he was, with that Spider-Man series, and become a millionaire overnight on one issue, and why Rob Liefeld could do the same and sell 5 million copies of X-Force 1, and again, make millions out of it. And then why Jim Lee could sell over 8 million on X-Men 1 and become so rich it's not funny. These guys were paid amounts of money per year that you and me would love to see in our lifetime once. They were getting it constantly. Why would they turn their back on that and go over into a company which they would have to take risks with? And the whole thing was because they wanted to control their characters. They wanted to make the money. And the companies ended up twisting that on them. Oh, they're only going off because they just want money. Well, why not? If I create something, why shouldn't I want to make as much money out of it as I possibly can? And Marvel at the time, more so than DC, were into that Todd McFarlane calls the plantation thing. And they were told this. I actually found it in a press release where Terry Stewart, who was at Marvel at the time, had actually said to the media that it doesn't really matter if these guys go, because we can replace them. It's the characters that mean everything, not the creators. They're nothing. They come and go all the time. They'll be back. No, you only get one Jim Lee. You only get one Todd McFarlane. You only get one Rob Liefeld. Sometimes you only get one Frank Miller, one John Byrne, one Walt Simonson. These guys don't walk in every day. And I looked at this quote and I thought, my God, I thought that was just a myth that Todd McFarlane used to say that, you're all interchangeable. You're replaceable. You're spare parts. But that is exactly how Marvel saw them, spare parts. They weren't as important as what Spider-Man was. Possibly they weren't. But at the time, certainly in 1990, 1991, Todd McFarlane probably was more important to Marvel than Spider-Man. But certainly when Jim Lee launched that X-Men title, he was more important to Marvel than what the X-Men were, because sales went down when he left. And with Rob Liefeld, God love him, the people that were taken off his books to keep him on the book of New Mutants, I mean, the collateral damage that these guys left behind, and it's not that they did this deliberately, they didn't, so I don't blame them for it. Louise Simonson, Chris Claremont, John Byrne, all of these established talents that were there, that all got taken off books because, oh, well, I'm thinking about moving on. Well, what can we do to keep you, Rob? Well, I really want to write it. Okay, Louise Simonson, flip out. Yeah, I'm thinking about going over to DC. Well, how do we keep you, Jim Lee? Well, I want to write it. Okay, Chris Claremont, off you go. But I've been writing X-Men for 20 years. Who gives a rat's? Go off. And we'll replace you with John Byrne. He sits there and goes, well, I want to write stories. I just don't want to script pages, which I can't make sense out of. No worries, John. We'll deal with that. And then he finds out later, through Terry Austin going to a party, that you've been sacked off your book because he was saying that Jim Lee and Willis Patacaro were difficult to work with. Well, no, John. You're the problem, not them. They're cashing it. You're not anymore. So, you have to really go back to the start in order for the present and for what happened with Image to make sense. You have to go back to when these guys, the pioneers, came in, how they got ripped off, and not just by companies but by other creators as well. And Jack Kirby, for example, in the 1980s, who went to a convention where, of all people, Jim Shooter stood up on stage and went, when Jack Kirby was doing Fantastic Four, he was getting $25 a page. We paid John Byrne more money last year for Fantastic Four than what Jack Kirby got paid for the entire 102 issues that he did. Jim Shooter's idea of making that point was to illustrate how far the industry had come when it comes to looking after creators and paying them. But it didn't really work, and it didn't go down too well with people that were there. And of course, at that time, Marvel was holding back all of Jack Kirby's original artwork whilst farming it out to other people. It was difficult, I suppose, to be a creator then. Well, by that point of that convention, you had Silvestri, Eric Larson, I think Rob Liefeld was even in the industry, Valentino certainly was, and Todd McFarlane was just coming in. These people were seeing all of this unfold in front of them, and it couldn't have been pleasant. It certainly wasn't pleasant for them. It wasn't pleasant for the people involved. Horrible, horrible things. It's available now. The book, you can get it through comic shops here in Adelaide and in Canberra, bookshops as well. And you can also get it on Amazon worldwide. Any country that you're in, if you can access Amazon, you can find the book. It's there. At the moment, it's a physical book only. There is no ebook. Get your hard copies and put them on the shelf, and there it is in all its magnificent glory. I really hope people pick it up, have a read of it, and learn something. I mean, I probably tend only to write books that I'd want to read. There's a gap on the bookshelf that's missing a book this big about Image Comics, and there's a gap on my bookshelves that's missing this. But now that gap's filled, and that's what I'm hoping people do. That they pick it up and they realise that this isn't, one person who worked at Image and it's their story. No, this is everyone's story, and it's also how we as readers looked at Image as well, because there's a lot in there of how people looked at it, what they were saying at the time. Without Image, a lot of freedoms that comic book creators have now, they would not have had. If these guys had stayed with Marvel or DC, you wouldn't have Walking Dead. You wouldn't have half the stuff that we get now. So they kicked the doors down, walked through them, and paved a path for every independent comic book maker to come through since. And for every comic book creator, if they'd stayed where they were, I think comics would be a lot more boring than what they are.